listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the Prime Minister's announcement that Australia will recognise a state of Palestine in September at the United Nations. We unpack what this historic move means. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Monday, the 11th of August. 5 Al Jazeera employees, including prominent Palestinian correspondent 28-year-old Anas al-Sharif, have been killed in a targeted Israeli airstrike in Gaza. Israel's military confirmed it struck al-Sharif, labelling him a terrorist posing as a journalist. For weeks, Israeli officials have openly threatened to target him, accusing him of being an Hamas operative, claims both al-Sharif and Al Jazeera strongly deny. Moments before his death, al-Sharif posted online about the relentless bombing of Gaza City. Al Jazeera says al-Sharif, another reporter and 3 camera operators were all killed when Israel bombed a journalist's tent near a local hospital, wiping out Al Jazeera's entire reporting team in Gaza City. Here is Al Jazeera correspondent Hani Mahmood.
This attack, just a week after an Israeli military official directly accused Anas and directly ran a campaign of incitement on Al Jazeera and correspondents on the ground because of their work, because of their relentless reporting on the starvation and the famine and the malnutrition, because they're bringing the truth to the screen for everyone. And just a week after that statement was made by a prominent Israeli military official, it got translated on the ground practically by targeting this tent and killing 2 of the most prominent journalists on the ground.
According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 186 news reporters and media workers have been killed in Gaza since the war began on the 7th of October 2023. There are reports the Labor government has hired a consulting firm to design a plan for universal childcare. The Guardian says Deloitte is commissioning a $10.4 million study to look at demand, costs and systematic reforms. Deloitte is set to access service needs and gather data across the early childhood education sector, with its final report set to be released before the next federal election. The government is reportedly considering a major overhaul, potentially replacing the childcare subsidy with a daily flat fee for families as part of the Prime Minister's push to make universal childcare a signature legacy. And Victorians were left stunned over the weekend to see a meteor flying over the night sky. The stunning light display on Saturday night was caught on camera, with many local residents in areas including Bendigo and Ballarat reporting they heard a sonic boom and also felt the ground shake. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on today's announcement by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese that Australia will recognise the state of Palestine in unison with the UK, France and Canada. Here is the Prime Minister at the joint news conference with Foreign Minister Penny Wong earlier today.
Today I can confirm that at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September, Australia will recognise the state of Palestine. Australia will recognise the right of the Palestinian people to a state of their own, predicated on the commitments Australia has received from the Palestinian Authority. We will work with the international community to make this right a reality. A 2-state solution is humanity's best hope to break the cycle of violence in the Middle East and to bring an end to the conflict, suffering and starvation in Gaza.
The move comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he would push ahead with a heavily criticised plan to take complete control of Gaza City, singling out Australia's stance.
To have European countries and Australia march into that rabbit hole, just like that, fall right into it, and buy this canard is disappointing. And I think it's actually shameful but it's not going to change our position.
Today's announcement by the Prime Minister has been criticised by the federal opposition, with Susan Lee saying the government's unilateral decision put it out of step with Australia's most important ally and most consequential player in the Middle East, the United States. We unpack today's historic decision with Dr. Josh Roose, who specialises in politics and law at Deakin University. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Pretty significant major announcement today from the Prime Minister, as we mentioned earlier, that Australia will recognise a state of Palestine in September at the United Nations. What does this move mean?
Look, it's primarily a diplomatic gesture. Australia's got no power, as do any of the other nations, to actually enforce this in practice. What it does is it signals effectively a coalition that are based on the belief that the way forward for that region and to end the conflict is to recognise a Palestinian state. It does come with strings attached. So we're talking here excluding Hamas from governance, which is an incredibly tricky sticking point because there's no guarantees that could ever happen. Demilitarising Gaza, but also holding democratic elections. Now, another sort of sticking point is that the last time democratic elections were held in 2005, Hamas were actually elected. It could be another militant group. So it's effectively a coalition of like-minded countries making an important diplomatic gesture. However, there is a significant array of potential sticking points moving forward.
There has been some analysis today saying that this does give hope for some type of peace in the Middle East. Do you think this is the right gesture? Do you think this is symbolic, that we'll actually don't see this ever working out in reality, in practical sense, as you just said there? And the Prime Minister has flagged this. There are a number of conditions which will be very, very difficult to manage.
Yeah, I think, look, peace is the ideal end state, absolutely. And there's been considerable suffering on both sides. War is horrific by any measure. I think ultimately what we have to look at is the extent to which this results in a meaningful, long-lasting peace and can be enacted. Now, it's important to understand the dynamics of the region. You've got two combatants, effectively. You've got the Israeli government and you've got Hamas, who are antithetically opposed to the existence of one another. And to that extent, it's beyond making this a diplomatic gesture. It's important to understand and I suppose to find out more detail about what this looks like in terms of international support for peace. So not just pressure, but support. What are these different countries going to do to support the peace process moving forward beyond political recognition and potentially empty gestures?
In regards to the reaction, we saw a pretty firm statement from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before the Prime Minister made this official announcement today, our time, but he almost intimated that they had been given a heads up that Australia was going to take this stance. It seemed that Benjamin Netanyahu actually singled Australia out. How do you think this plays out for our relationship or dynamic with Israel right now?
Well, I think let's distinguish between the Israeli government and the Israeli people. It's by no means a popular government in the Israeli political landscape. However, it maintains significant power and obviously control over its destiny in terms of Gaza and its international relations and relationships. I think what we've got to understand again is the deep-seated nature of this conflict. I do not think that Israel is inclined in any way, shape or form to take external pressure from other countries on board when it makes its decisions, particularly this government. I think it will make its own decisions about the approach. I think in particular the right of the Israeli government are pretty determined for a more comprehensive victory, as they see it, in Gaza. So I really think that this is an international step. It's diplomacy, but the extent to which it can be enacted and Israel can be forced to comply with any international sort of statements is extremely limited.
And in regards to, and you make a great point distinguishing from Israel and the current Benjamin Netanyahu government, in regards to, again, the criticism of the Prime Minister's announcement today, they have been criticised by the opposition. Susan Lee has come out, and I'm quoting the opposition leader here, saying the government's unilateral decision puts it out of step with Australia's most important ally and most consequential player in the Middle East, the US. We haven't heard, as we're recording this episode, any responses yet from US President Donald Trump. We already know the Prime Minister hasn't been able to get a face-to-face meeting with Mr. Trump as yet. How do you think this situation plays out with our fragile alliance as we see it with the US right now?
Yeah, I think if we're talking realpolitik, which is effectively now governing international relations, particularly so far as the US is concerned, this will, the Australian government will certainly be rebuked by the US. I'm not casting any aspersions on whether or not that's a good thing. It's basically a fact that they're likely to strongly condemn and criticise Australia's approach. I think it was always going to be criticised by the Liberal Party in that respect as well. And the main argument is that it rewards instability, it rewards Hamas for taking the actions that they did take on October 7. And to that extent, it's, there's obviously significant civilian suffering, and then the extent to which that will be measurable will come into the future. But I think what we're seeing here is a distinguishing of Australian, Canadian, New Zealand, other Anglosphere countries' foreign policies from that of the US, which has deeper, significant long-term implications for that relationship, particularly with potential regional conflict in the near future.
Josh, I'm paraphrasing the Prime Minister when he made this announcement today, but Mr. Albanese said along the lines that, the world was shocked and appalled by what is unfolding right now in Gaza, especially the horrific starvation of children, families and civilians. Benjamin Netanyahu, as we mentioned earlier, was adamant about the full takeover of Gaza. Do you think these developments that we've seen over the last couple of hours here will change anything on his stance?
Look, it's got the potential to reinforce the Israeli position. Again, us against them sort of mentality that is adopted by the Netanyahu government. And it's likely, if anything, I would think, to result in the right actually having a little bit of an increased momentum within their own government to get this done and to get it done quickly. It's not popular with his own military, so the reporting goes. I'm not privy to those arguments, and I think as a broader commentary on what we're seeing in Israel and in Gaza, a lot of this is through second and third hand sources. A lot of what we're hearing from the region, from both what's happening on the ground in Gaza, but also within the Israeli government, is coming from second, third, even fourth hand sources, each of them with their own motivation. And I think we've got to be very careful in basically what we're building and what evidence base we're drawing upon in making any decision going forward and in assessing the situation. So I think to that extent, in terms of the realpolitik that dominates now, it may well only harden the Netanyahu government's resolve. Obviously, we'll see.
The UN is set to meet in September next month. We know that's a number of weeks away, but that still is a long time, those weeks, for what's continuing to unfold right now, especially in Gaza. What do you think happens at the UN, Josh?
Look, I think there's considerable momentum internationally. There's been, as I said, the Western states, first France, but then obviously the Anglosphere states coming on board with this certainly increases international pressure on Israel. I think at the end of the day, what we're likely to see in voting will be the US potentially using its veto, Israel and a handful of small states voting against any resolution. But as we know and history indicates, that will not necessarily carry any weight on the ground. I think there's, whether for right or for wrong, the conflict will continue until the Israeli government determine that it should cease. So this may well increase pressure on arms manufacturers, other companies that do business with Israel and so on. There's talk of sanctions. The extent to which that occurs is yet to be played out. But I do think ultimately given the timeline, we may well see a rapid increase in on-the-ground action to bring this to a swifter resolution. But obviously, from an Israeli perspective, there's hostages. And from the the international community, in particular now Australia, there's also civilian suffering. And if anything, forebodes a very violent next couple of months, or next few weeks, I should say, before the UN next meet.
We really appreciate you joining us with your analysis. Thanks so much, Josh.
Thanks for your time.
That was Dr. Josh Roose, Associate Professor at Deakin University. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.